Terry Manning, and I'm Associate Vice President for Institutional Research at Central Piedmont Community College, and I'm a data coach. And we are going to have a session today looking at how Achieving the Dream colleges can align their accreditation work with their Achieving the Dream work. And the first thing I want to do is introduce who are going to be your panelists. I'm going to be a facilitator. I'm not speaking, so but we have up here Amber Holloway, who is an Associate Vice President for Quality Services with the Higher Learning Commission of North Central. We have Mike Johnson, who's back there handing out handouts, who is with the Commission on Colleges. He is the Senior Vice President and Chief of Staff now. When I met him, he was just a lowly VP. For the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on Colleges. And then Greg Hoppers over here, who is the Dean at Patrick Henry Community College, is going to talk to you a little bit about how they align their student success work with their accreditation with the Southern Association. I think you were QEP, is that right?
Among many parts.
Okay, all right. So the reason we're having this session, I want to bring this up a little bit. We're going to walk through these various pieces today, and this is going to be very casual, and people can ask questions all you want. I know you probably have quite a few. So we're going to look a little bit at accreditation student success outcomes. We're going to look at aligning, your Achieving the Dream work with your accreditation activities, and then we'll have questions and a discussion at the end. And I think we have a little activity for them.
What we've provided, folks, is a kind of a cognitive organizer for you. And if you've got questions as we go, you can jot that down, and we do have some space for an activity.
Okay. The sheet that I put together for you is this grid, and I want to walk through this just a little bit at first. Achieving the Dream colleges span all 6 regional accrediting agencies, and we have, I've coached 13 colleges, and I have one in every 6 of those 6 regionals. And so what's required of them is slightly different, but really not a lot anymore. So what I did is I went through all 6 regionals and sort of pulled out the language of what they require or strongly suggest, and put an X in the box where they actually require it. And where the difference seems to me to be is in the level of specificity that these accrediting agencies have. So I'm going to kind of slide down about midway through the table when it says assessment of general education outcomes. Most all of the regional accrediting agencies say you have to do the assessment of general education outcomes. But if you slide down one more line where it says identify specific and required gen ed goals, only a couple of them do that. And what I mean is they say, assess gen ed goals, but to include critical thinking, written communication, and such. So they're very specific there. Also, most of the accrediting commissions ask you to do some type of effective, and this is down a couple from the gen ed ones, an effective holistic system of evaluation of programs and services, but they don't specify what that evaluation process has to be. But some of them do. They say you must do program review, and so it's defined as an absolute must. Where others leave it kind of open to you that if you want to do an assessment type of process and call it something else, you can. And so that's really where most of the differences are, but a lot of the regionals are also going through changes in standards right now, and I have a colleague who's doing that for ACCJC, and they looked at SACS's requirements, they looked at what everybody else is doing, and so they're all kind of looking at each other's and trying to kind of consolidate them to be more similar. So you're just unlucky if you live in certain parts of the country compared to others based on your accrediting commission to where they're more similar. So we're going to start with, these are the 6 regionals. I forgot to put this little slide in there. They gave me some, their logos to put up here. And as I said, there are Achieving the Dream colleges in each of these 6 regionals, but 70% of the colleges are in the Higher Learning Commission and the Commission on Colleges with SACS. And so that's the reason why we brought these 2 in, because they are going to have more to say to most of you than if we brought the others. So I believe we're going to first start with the Higher Learning Commission. So Amber.
All right, thank you, Terry. And thank all of you for coming in here this afternoon. I know it's a beautiful day outside, and it was very tempting to just stay out there by the water. It's, I believe, less than 20 degrees in Chicago. I don't know, I haven't really looked. I'm flying back tomorrow, so I've just decided not to pay too much attention to it. But I do want to share with you this afternoon, I just want to spend a few minutes discussing what the Higher Learning Commission expects of our member institutions regarding measures of student success and the changes that we've implemented in recent years related to those expectations. And so the two major changes that I'm going to discuss are the revision to our criteria for accreditation and the launch of our Academy for Student Persistence and Completion. So after 2 years of listening sessions on the road, followed by revisions and comments at our annual conference, and then more listening sessions, our new criteria became effective on January 1st of 2013. So what's different in our new criteria? I'm going to use criterion 4 as an example because it obviously directly speaks to student outcomes and measures of student success. And I've provided a handout for you, and I have pulled out the overall criterion statement for criterion 4, and then core components 4B and 4C. I left out 4A just because it doesn't directly apply to our discussion today, I don't believe, and because I wanted it to fit on one page. Just trying to keep it simple. Okay, so previously, the focus of the criterion that related to outcomes was about assessment of student learning. And obviously, the new assessment remains in core component 4B, but the structure is a little different. And each core component now has a specific subcomponent statement of expectation. So you can see on your handout that underneath 4B, there are now 4 statements that go into more specificity about what we expect of institutions. And then again under 4C. And 4C is where we really get into what's new, which is the new emphasis on retention, persistence, and completion. And so 4C says the institution demonstrates a commitment to educational improvement through ongoing attention to retention, persistence, and completion rates in its degree and certificate programs. So with the addition of 4C, this is where we've really had institutions trying to understand what does that mean? What is it that they're going to be asked to do? And so if you look at those 4 core components, 4 subcomponents under 4C, we try to go into greater detail about what those expectations are. But I would like to specifically call your attention to number 4, because I have gotten several phone calls, emails in the last couple months asking, where is the Commission's definition of persistence? Where is the Commission's definition of retention? We're not going to define that as a Commission. There's simply no way that we could come up with a definition that would cover the vast membership that we have with over 19 states, particularly because so many of those states have already implemented performance-based funding where they've already defined those terms for that performance-based funding. And so what we ask is that the institution, we say that they're not required to use IPED's definitions, and they're encouraged to choose measures that are suitable to their student population. So again, we try to keep the institution focused on their own mission and what's suitable to their institution, but the institutions are accountable for the validity of the measures. So obviously you can't go out and come up with something that no one's ever heard of. To measure persistence and completion, it needs to be valid and it needs to have be based in good practice. But we've left that broad on purpose because we know that we can't go in and impose a definition of retention, persistence, completion on our institutions without all kinds of things coming up immediately about how that wouldn't fit and wouldn't work, and what about, our funding formula with this state, how do we fit that in? So we recognize that with that broader statement. So with the new emphasis on persistence and completion in the criteria, that's also partly the genesis for the second change that we've implemented that I want to talk about, which is the launch of our new Academy for Student Persistence and Completion in December 2013, just last year. And this was in response to institutional needs. We already had an academy on assessment of student learning that we created in 2006, and that was in response to the emphasis on assessment that was in our previous revision to our criteria. And both of them are 4-year sequences of events that are designed to provide avenues for growth in 2 areas that we believe are essential for institutional improvement: assessment of student learning and student persistence and completion. So institutions commit to those 4 years. It's completely voluntary. And it's really important to note that there's no direct relationship between participation in an academy and accreditation evaluation. So there's no guarantee that any outcome will be beneficial to the institution. But a lot of institutions will end up using the work that they do in those academies as evidence in their reaccreditation evaluation. But we don't make any guarantees about that. Again, it's completely voluntary. And overall, we don't set a specific bar for achievement, and I know we're not alone in this with the other regionals. Again, it's to different degrees, as Terry noted and is in the handout. But we expect all of our institutions, whether they're in an academy or not, to collect data, to analyze it, to evaluate it, and then use those results to improve and to do all of that with integrity. And so, achieving the dream projects are obviously going to be, for many institutions, a rich source of evidence for those that are trying to align their work with accreditation efforts, because many of you are already doing exactly that. You're doing the work that I just described. Your programs are very focused on data. You're collecting it, you're analyzing it, you're evaluating it, and you're using those results to improve. So I think that just in a broad perspective, the alignment between accreditation and student success and achieving the dream is pretty clear, at least from our perspective, as to how you can link those efforts. And we're going to go into that a little bit more. I know my co-presenters are going to discuss that from their perspective, and you probably will have several questions. But I just want to commend you all for the work that you're doing, because I think that it's very valuable, and I'm looking forward to seeing the results for the next 10 years. Thanks.
Well, this conference has already paid off. Anything that will give me a cognitive organizer is something that I'm totally in favor of. It's good to be here. Appreciate it. It's always nice to come back to Central Florida. I actually was born in Central Florida, so it's kind of fun to come back. I probably shouldn't tell you this, but it was also nice to see the local flora and fauna on my way over here. Is this black snake running in front of my path, just like home. I mean, I grew up here when we had a lot of us. You know, it's interesting when you start looking at achieving the dream literature and then start looking at accrediting standards, how much they overlap. And I was really taken by that. I went to the Achieving the Dream website and looked at what they call the model, which presents 5 principles and 5 steps and 1 goal. And the 1 goal was success for all students, and it just reminded me that at our annual meeting this last December, the theme of our meeting was students are central to success, which is, of course, the acronym for SACS. Someone's going to have to help me come up with one for SACS COC, since that's really our name now. And I've been working on it, but I really haven't quite gotten that one down. But we'll get there somewhere. We'll get a really good one. But that overlap is just so obvious. And you start looking through the 5 steps, for example. Commit to improving student outcomes. Well, yes, that's almost word for word in our standards. Use data to prioritize actions. It may not be word for word, but it's certainly implied. It's a subtext of the standards. Engage stakeholders to help develop a plan. Well, we've got something called the Quality Enhancement Plan, and that quite explicitly requires the engagement of stakeholders. We have implement, evaluate, and improve strategies, which ties in very nicely with our core requirement that we have in institutional effectiveness, and establish a culture of continuous improvement, which is one of the underlying themes of accreditation. So it's really striking how much commonality there is. Now, I put up there some of the standards. We all talk in numbers in the accrediting business, and some of the numbers which correspond very closely to the kinds of material, the type of data that you're able to get out of achieving the dream and participation in it. I do want to point out one element where I think it's important to establish perhaps not a difference, but at least be cognizant of how wording can sometimes imply different things to different people. And that's the distinction between institutional effectiveness and student learning outcomes and student success, or student success relative to learning outcomes versus other kinds of outcomes, which I think is something that frankly has been missing in the national debate on the completion agenda, and it is something that we need to remember here. The missing element sometimes in the discussion of student success is maintaining the quality of the institution's educational programs. And that's a key component of what accreditation does. And so you do have to be a little bit careful sometimes trying to use all the language and just port it straight over without thinking through exactly what it is you're saying in some cases. And we'll see that at looking at some of the different standards that we have and the differences that are implied by that very, very what appears to be minor difference. Similar to what Amber pointed out, we're still in discussions on this, and it is an agenda which is getting more and more attention. And it would not surprise me to see SAC-COC develop some sort of a requirement that institutions provide specific data, maybe very similar to IPEDS data, and maybe something that can be done using student clearinghouse data, but something that establishes, if you will, a benchmark of performance in terms of student success and an expectation that institutions try to make improvement relative to that benchmark. It's something that our Executive Council has discussed, and it's something that I know is still under discussion to do that. Now, as Amber also said, we have fought very hard, and we fought on behalf of our institutions fairly hard during the Spellings Commission time period and since, when the federal government keeps trying to impose bright line indicators, if you will, and in terms of graduation rates or some other standard that they may come up with. Given the huge disparity in resources and the huge disparity in terms of the nature of the student bodies and admission standards of our institutions. I mean, we have very, very different institutions in membership. And it's very hard to come up with a single standard, for example. And the community colleges rightfully have argued for a long time that graduation rates as currently construed, at least with an IPEDS definition, are next to useless as an indicator. But we have talked about developing some type of indicator and then using the institution's recent effort in that student success indicator as a benchmark where the institution would be expected to show that they're improving from where they started. And that's our approach, at least, to try to deal with the variety of institutions that we have. But if you work through these standards, and I'm not going to read the text of all of the standards, they're actually on the handout with the exception of standard 2.10, and by mistake I just pulled 2.9 out of the computer and put it on the sheet. And 2.9 has to do with libraries, and while it's not irrelevant, the one I was looking for was the one that has to do with student services. Oh, I do that kind of stuff all the time. But let me just read that standard, the one that's missing from the handout. And if you didn't get one, I think there are some more copies up here on the front table. You're welcome to pick them up later. But we have this standard. It says the institution provides student support programs, services, and activities consistent with its mission that are intended to promote student learning and enhance the development of its students. And I think that overlaps quite well also with the kind of data that you're collecting through Achieving the Dream. So I would argue that the information that you collect and the emphasis on database decision making fits into these standards very, very well. And if you're writing a fifth-year report or a compliance certification and you're not using that information, it raises an interesting question of why not. Because it's so logical that that data would fit into the reporting that you're doing to us. Now, you can't just simply say we're an Achieving the Dream school, therefore leave us alone. We're not going to do that.
Would that you could.
Would that you could, right. But it may help you be able to go through those particular standards much more cleanly, much more straightforwardly, and be able to build a very cogent, sound argument of why you're in compliance with those standards. One I want to call special attention to is Standard 4.1. It's a federal requirement, and the wording of our standard parallels very closely the federal language in terms of what they require of an accreditor when they look at an institution. And it reads like this, quote, "The institution evaluates success with respect to student achievement consistent with its mission. Criteria may include enrollment data, retention, graduation, course completion, and job placement rates, state licensing examinations, student portfolios, or other means of demonstrating achievement of goals," end quote. But let me add that it's not quite that simple. First of all, I think that fits very well with the data you're collecting, and you ought to be able to just put that straight out there. But the other expectation in that standard is that you have established some thresholds of acceptability for those criteria. So what's acceptable in terms of these course completion rates or these graduation rates? What's acceptable in terms of retention? What's acceptable relative to your enrollment data? And then you report out your numbers relative to what you think is acceptable, and then you justify why you think it's acceptable. And if you do that, and I think you're doing a lot of that already in Achieving the Dream, this standard is very, very straightforward. I mean, you're just reporting out data, so that one's pretty easy. The other one I'm going to mention, and I'm sure Greg's going to talk about too, is Quality Enhancement Plan. The Quality Enhancement Plan is something that used to be unique to the southern region. Some of the other regions have picked up a similar type project over the last few years, where the QEP is a requirement that an institution develop a specific project/plan having to do with an element related to student learning. Now, here's where I think my earlier comments about student success are important for you to understand. A QEP that is on student success without any explicit tie-in to student learning, success in student learning, I think is going to be hard for you to do. But a QEP that overlaps in a very heavy way a lot of what you're doing relative to student success, with that learning component thrown in there, I think is something that can fit our QEP expectations quite well. And if nothing else, you've developed the background data which ought to help you be able to look at your institution and say, what type of project, what type of goal do we have relative to student learning that would really make a difference in our student body? And so community colleges have done their QEPs on first-year experiences. They've done their QEPs on things like improvement in developmental coursework. They've done it, especially in states that have sort of forced it on them, blended development and first college coursework. Those kinds of things have worked very, very well for institutions as quality enhancement plans. And whether our reviewers know it or not, I suspect in many cases they're looking at data that came out of your Achieving the Dream efforts. So almost straight out in some cases. So I want to encourage you all in that regard to use the information you have when you address standards, but also remember that this distinction between student learning outcomes or student learning and student success outcomes is one that sometimes you need to pay attention to as you go through the accrediting process. And that's all I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to actually give you a little bit of nuts and bolts of what Patrick Henry has done. But I'm going to ask a quick question. How many of you are from either SACS or higher learning? Good. The rest of you, you're done for the day. I'm just kidding. The reason I ask that is because, as was just alluded to, I think the no-brainer topic of where Achieving the Dream and the accreditation overlies is in that quality enhancement plan with SACS and the quality initiative with higher learning. And let me explain what I mean by that. As an example, Patrick Henry, round one school with Achieving the Dream. We joined in 2004 when it was only just a few handfuls of schools and 200 people at the Dream Initiative, or at the Dream Conference, I should say. And our strategy, one of the strategies that we chose for our ATD work was student engagement. what we call cooperative learning, changing the culture of the classroom. As you well know, if you've been part of that process, you know that it requires broad-based engagement, lots of pulling of data, lots of internal research in order to come upon those strategies. When it came time 3 years later for us to look at our quality enhancement plan, we pulled and used and chose a lot of the same stuff that we'd already done, because we no need to reinvent the wheel, and used a topic, critical thinking, that was a direct outlay of cooperative learning, that the research said was directly linked. So there was a very important, juxtaposition for us. How many of you are involved in your accreditation work? In other words, you're writing sections, things like that. Yeah, most of us. I feel your pain. There's a special spot in heaven for us. As Patrick Henry is a very, relatively small school, 2,300 FTE. And small schools, those of us in administration, we wear lots of hats. So I'm a dean, I'm our ATD leader, I am our SACS leader, our SACS representative, and I also wrote our 5th year compliance report. And if you don't get anything else, I hope you get this today. Every single section of that 5th year compliance report had ATD data in it. Every single section. Now, I would not venture to say that every section of the 10-year compliance report with 70 plus standards would have it, but every single section of those 17 that we had to report on for that compliance narrative, that 5-year report, had ATD data in it. In fact, when it came time to start making the case for each one of those sections, we started with our ATD data and filled in the holes accordingly. So it became very much part and parcel of what we've done. I'll also be very open and honest with you. I have the privilege of having served on a lot of accreditation teams with SACS, mainly at the 10-year spot. And I have to be careful, but it is so wonderful when you go to a school that has become deeply embedded in achieving the dream. You can tell it very quickly, because the work, the data, the thought process is so aligned between achieving the dream and the accreditation agencies, at least from my experience. So here's what we're going to do to sort of get at what we're all doing. You've got a cognitive organizer that's been created, and if I could get you to pull that out, I would appreciate it very much. How many of you understand what I mean when I say initiative overload? You can even say amen to that. It is something that we're all experiencing, and I contend that if there's any way to overlap the work, that is a win-win, because otherwise these operations in isolation, initiatives in isolation, I think is what causes the overload. But when you can overlay those initiatives, old saying, kill 2 birds with 1 stone, I think we get a much greater depth of understanding. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I know it's late in the afternoon, you're trying to stay awake, but if you're at a table with only 1 or 2 people, would you mind standing up and going to a table where there's somebody else? So that means if you're at a table with 2 people, I don't want to point out anybody. If you're at a table with 2 people, would you stand up and join someone else so that there's more than just a couple of you? Thank you so much. Because the only way we're going to engage conversations is with multiple folks. So thank you very much for helping us out there. So before we get started on the activity and hear from other folks, because I don't want you just to hear what Patrick Henry's done, there's some great stuff that's going on at other institutions with their accreditation work. Let me ask you first, if you'll take just a moment and look at the very top. The very top, just ask if you've got any questions, if you've got any clarifications, things that are needed from the 3 panelists who've discussed so far. Anything that you'd like to ask them before we kind of get into our work at our tables. Anyone? Yes, ma'am. Is there accreditation in heaven? If it were, it wouldn't be called heaven, it'd be called the other place.
He didn't say there was a special place in heaven for the accreditors.
That's right. We might actually say there's a special place. Never mind. Any other questions before we dive into this work? Yes, ma'am.
I'm very new to achieving dream, and
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thrilled. And so my question is, a lot of when we look at success, like in gateway courses and developmental courses, we look at grades, right? And something, I feel like I have a question about whether grades are acceptable data around learning, because I feel like they're not, right? And so we need to be doing a direct assessment of outcomes, but how far down does that have to go?
That's a fantastic question, and I'll address from a local perspective and let them address from the accrediting perspective. I mentioned to you that we did our 5th-year report. We just got the results back a few weeks ago and did exceptionally well with one exception. And I don't mind opening up and telling you, it's on program learning outcomes, which is throughout the country an area of struggle. I feel like I also pastor a church, and I feel like I'm there because y'all are nodding your head, you're even saying amen. You know what I'm talking about? It's a struggle throughout, not just the South, but throughout all accredited bodies, program learning outcomes. And so we've got some things that we've got to submit to SACS as a follow-up. And I was doing a workshop with my faculty on Friday, right before we came up here, on getting this data together. And that same question came up. Can we use grades to prove, in this case, program learning outcomes? Some of you were nodding your head. What do you think the appropriate answer to that is? No. We cannot use grades to prove program learning outcomes, but we can, and I'll explain why from my perspective in just a second, but we can use pass rates. We can use course completion rates. Why can we not use a grade? And this is just as simple as I can make it. Why? And you all feel free to change anything I say. But from the practitioner's perspective, this is why we cannot use grades. Let's say that this table right here are all our English 101 teachers. This is our Gateway English class, and they all teach 101. And we've got even a standardized syllabus of some sort that we utilize. But Hyla gives 20% of her final grade for class participation, and Andy gives 45% of his final grade for class participation, and Kathy doesn't even do class participation. She says it's all a final exam. Do you understand where we're going? Well, if students who get A's or B's or C's in that class, you may have a program learning outcome linked to English 101, but it may not even got measured correctly because 45% of the grade was based on class attendance. Does that make sense? So again, just from a local practitioner's perspective, what we've done, not telling you to do this, is develop a standardized written language rubric where the final exam, or the final paper in our Gateway English course all gets assessed by this rubric. Now that doesn't mean that the rest of the class, they don't have academic freedom and all that good stuff that we holler and scream about as faculty members. They do. But for that one course, that one project, that counts a certain percentage of the grade, that part is standardized. We're measuring written communication by that standardized rubric at the end of that Gatekeeper English course. So at the end of the semester, we pull that data and we've got all kinds of things that we're doing the same thing with oral communications, a standardized rubric for a final project that measures that program learning outcome across the disciplines. You all want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add a little bit to it, although I think that you hit on what I really want to emphasize, and that's that it's very common to have artifacts taken from a class as part of your student learning assessment within a program. Now, some of the regionals require course level learning outcomes and assessment of course level learning outcomes. SACS COC is explicit that our standard applies to program learning outcomes.
Thank God.
And so at the program level, well, we actually had a proposal to make it both, and it went down in flaming defeat a few years back. But artifacts from classes are often used, and sort of an embedded assessment is another word that's used, where you collect artifacts and you grade them many times independently of the kinds of grading that's been assigned by the instructor. You're just literally using the classroom as a means to collect data to be able to undertake assessments. Now, there are perhaps some special cases where with superior training or because of the nature of how the grade is determined, that there might be some ways to get program learning outcomes based on course grades. But the problem is, it's still going to probably be too general to do any good. I mean, I can envision a four-year college, and I know some four-year colleges that do this actually, that in their accounting major have a series of the AICPA prep kind of exams that they may give their students and actually use how they do on those as the determination of the course grade. But one grade to cover all of accounting, I mean, that doesn't really deal with learning outcomes. You don't have what I would call actionable data once you know how well the students do. If they don't do well, what do you fix? You've got to have more detail than that. So there are ways to have parts of grades, I think, sometimes. Now, for a program outcome, and I make a distinction between a student learning outcome, which I mean exactly that. It has to do with what the student learns, what the student can do or knows, or changes in values or other kinds of things that affect the student. It's very hard to use grades for that, but pass rates are often a very valid program outcome, especially pass rates in gatekeeper courses or historically what are called gatekeeper courses. So, you know, DWF rates or something, or the flip side of them, the converse, are very important indicators in some cases, and they're something that makes sense that you would be looking at from an assessment perspective. But that's not measuring student learning.
Super.
Yeah, I would just add, I think both have covered it really well. I would just add that from an accreditation perspective, you know, you have to be able to demonstrate whatever it is that you're claiming, right? So you have to be able to provide evidence. And so still the bedrock of what we do is peer review, right? And so it's not going to be your accreditor who's going to make that decision, who's going to tell you, yes, you have to use rubrics. I mean, you know, Patrick just described a great way of doing that, but still, we're not going to say, you know, you must use rubrics. But if a peer review team goes into the institution and looks at what you're doing and sees only grades, you may end up with some sort of a recommendation that, you know, that's not good practice, or that something needs to come out of that, or however that works for that certain regional group. But, you know, again, so I just want to add that from that perspective, that, you know, ultimately it comes down to that peer review team and good practice and what's judged by your peers for that to be.
Great, thank you very much. Any other questions? Another question before we do a little bit of the work. We won't keep you long, I promise. But any other questions? All right, excellent question. Thank you for posing that. If you would note at the bottom, there are, on the bottom of the front and then a couple on the back, there are 3 questions on the back, one on the front, that we'd like for you to talk about at your teams, or at your tables rather, and we're going to ask you to do some reporting out as you've gone around and conversed about this. And I know you can read, but let me just kind of talk you through them. The one at the bottom says, how have you aligned your ATD student success work at accreditation? I gave you an example with Patrick Henry and our QEP and our 5th year report and all the things that we're doing that, but I know there are multitudes of other examples, so if you could address that quickly, that would be great. On the back, how have you tied strategic planning to your ATD student success work? That's a billion-dollar question. And circle it, star it, underline it, put an asterisk beside it, because if you can tackle that nut, you can really leverage the 2 things, accreditation and achieving the dream. Thirdly, how have you used ATD data analysis work to enhance accreditation at your institution? Let me ask you a question. Confession is good for the soul. How many of you have trouble accessing and getting a hold of data? Sure, I think most of us do. Most of us do. Many of us do, I should say. I'm certainly not here to sell companies, but there are certainly companies that help with that. But it's always an ongoing challenge, especially at some of our smaller institutions. Finding number 4, how could you or have you incorporated non-classroom-based strategies, like, in the language of achieving the dream, policy changes, committed leadership, broad engagement, etc., into your accreditation work? All right? So we're only going to take, so that you get out of here at a good time, we're going to take about 10, 12 minutes. If you would, talk through these, jot down some things so that we can report out and share on this. All right? Here we go.
in our strategic plan, and even just to justify it might be my budget here. Other departments get their budget here to say why we feel it's sufficient funding. And
Right, wrap up your conversations if you would. I recognize you probably didn't get it all through. Let's report out on some of this. Let's report out, if I could have your attention for just a second. All right, let me correct something I said just a second ago, and my IR person is, tell me your name? Yeah, Kelly mentioned, and she's exactly right, and I should have said this more appropriately. Most of us don't have a problem accessing data. Our problem comes in utilizing data, closing that data loop. Yeah, that's a whole different, and that's exactly right. And to give you again, practitioner's example, on Friday when I was leading this workshop with our faculty about this program learning outcomes and data pulling and things like that, they continued to argue with me that just providing the data was enough. And so I added a column to our 5-column plan between the data, 12 data, 12, 13 data, and the column in the middle says, what'd you do with this? And I made it as simple as I can. What changed because of this data? And if nothing changed, then we didn't use data. We just wrote it down in the block. And that's not using data. All right? So I need we're going to need a spokesperson for each group. So I need a brave soul from each table to please stand up. A brave soul from each table to please stand up. Quickly, quickly, quickly. Quickly. I should see more than one person standing at this point. I need a brave soul from each table. Quickly. Quickly. We're all getting hungry now, waiting on you. A brave soul from each table, please stand. A brave soul. We need a soul from this table to stand. I have anointed. Very good. All right, those of you who are standing, you get to pick the person who is the spokesperson at your table. All right? Those people who are standing, you may pick the person who's the spokesperson. If you want it to be you, you can. You can pick someone else if you'd like. All right, here we go. Question number 1. Question number 1. So the new spokespeople, please stand. Question number 1. How have you aligned ATD, student success work, and accreditation? All right? And I'm going to try to do this so that the microphone can capture everybody.
We aligned it by looking at our current strategic plan and seeing what we wanted to do, because our accreditation actually happened during our last our planning year.
Great.
So when we did all the data collection, it made it very easy to do the middle states, or our accrediting agency, to do that report. And we took what we already had in the strategic plan and the initiatives we were planning to do and used that to come together with the reporting. We went through with flying colors with no really any recommendation.
Beautiful. We're going to do something in doing this that we're calling deep and brief, where we're going to go very deep but very brief. All right, here we go. How did you come up with question number 1? How do you use your ATD student success work accreditation?
We have very different approaches. I mean, it's different colleges at the table, but I think I can generalize by saying that between the strategic plans at the colleges, the ATD plan and core principles, and then the particular accrediting body, and looking at all of those definitions and then having those guide each other.
Fantastic. Thank you. Stephen?
Yeah, well, we're all pretty much new to ATD, so we haven't really done much of this yet.
All right, thanks for sharing that. All right.
But we're planning on maybe incorporating teams. So you have a team working on accreditation, we have other teams working on different initiatives. Why not have a student success team that looks at all of these different things, that knows what's going on in ATD and can use that information to plan for the community.
Beautiful, beautiful. Everyone's going to speak to questions 1 and 2, and then we're going to kind of divide for 3 and 4. All right, Donna?
From the outset, we purposely did not talk about achieving the dream. We talked about the student success agenda. And we talked about it always within the context of, and then this was at the recommendation of our coach, Kim McClenny, who said, this is bigger than achieving the dream. Make sure that it aligns with accreditation standards. And we took that approach from the outset. We did similarly, we created a student success team that was a broad team, and then had campus-based and district-wide teams that were all focused on student success and used those metrics in every conversation we had.
Beautiful. When student success becomes the conversation starter, ATD becomes a very salient point. Well said. Chad?
For Zane State College, and I will say, we can count, there were 3 people when we had to divide up and go to kids. We are an A-Corp institution, and so the student success work that we're doing today is rolled throughout the entire A-Corp system process.
Fantastic. Thank you. Cameron?
Everyone at our table is pretty much new to ATD with the exception of North Central, and we've been in since 2007 and just received leader college status this past summer. And I explained to the group that we are having our accreditation visit a year from right now. And so our core team is our self-study team, also strategic planning team, and our student success core team.
So if you're looking for a strategy, that's a super one. That's an excellent one. Your core team, ATD core team, overlaps with your accreditation team, which overlaps with your student success team. Excellent. Good. And planning, strategic planning. We're going to get to that one in section 2. Great. Yeah.
Okay, everybody said everything.
All right, very good.
No, we talked about not using the ATD terminology, having that overarching student success group that is addressing the big picture, and of course they're involved in the planning and accreditation too.
You know, that's a great point, and I know that in conversations I've had with lots of folks in ATD, and I think you can probably speak to this, there is an ongoing belief somehow that ATD was a dev ed initiative. So that, of course, the ATD is much, those of us who started this in 2004 were kind of harnessed with that. But this is so much bigger. This is a student success initiative. So this idea, kind of decoupling it from the nomenclature, I think is fabulous. Don?
Some of the same ideas, we also really downplayed the ATD title to all of our work and focused on student success. But the one report that has always been called the ATD report has been the course success report that breaks it down by the different Pell Grant status, ethnicities, gender, and age. And that particular report has been used in the program review, program outcomes, a lot of accreditation work.
So you're calling that the student success report?
Actually, that one is called the ATD report.
Very good. All right, let's go to the second question, which I think really gets to the heart of this. And again, from just a practitioner's perspective, if there is a magic bullet, a way to bring all this together, it is under strategic planning. So the question read is, how have you tied strategic planning to your ATD success work? Now, we've already heard some of that. So if there is something that has not been shared that you can share with us, stand back up. If you're a spokesperson that you have not heard, share with us.
The only thing I would say is that the simplest, we took the initiatives and we built them into the plan. We took all our ATD initiatives and they're part of our strategic plan. And we attached metrics to them that weren't there before. Before we were putting them out there, just seeing what we were going to find out from these. We found out the ones that work across the board, developmental ed, student success, and we built them into the plan.
Thank you. I hear folks say often, this initiative can be the umbrella, or this initiative can be the umbrella. And again, from a simple practitioner's perspective, the strategic plan is the umbrella. Can I get a witness? Everything else had better be linked to the strategic plan, or as I said over here, we're just spinning plates.
The only thing we added was the fact that the folks on the strategic plan have to be intermingled with the folks on ATD, or there has to be clear communication about what's happening in North. Because if you don't do that, you will have strategic planning happening over here and ATD planning over here.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would also say that I know our strategic plan as a technical college has always been focused on our mission and our goals. But I think ATD provides an opportunity to finesse, not just focusing on broad mission and broad goals, but how well are you doing towards each of those goals and towards your mission, and how can you finesse your strategic plan according to that.
Absolutely. It gives us those benchmarking metrics, if you will. Chad?
Our strategic plan has 5 categories, so one of those is quality. And basically what we've done is each of the larger bodies in the organization, whether that's president's cabinets, academic council, our team for data quality, all have assigned duties that align within that strategic plan. I don't think there's any way to separate our strategic plan from our accreditation work from our team work.
Excellent, excellent, excellent.
9 strategic goals, and all of our success initiatives are embedded in strategic goals.
Beautiful. Getting my exercise for the month of February.
I would say for the new colleges in particular, using your ATD data to broadly engage your stakeholders as you're developing and/or revising your strategic plan. That was critical for us. That data was a big part of it, and when you're re-upping with Achieving the Dream, you have to show broad engagement. Well, use your ATD data to broadly engage your stakeholders, and you can only do great with us.
Absolutely beautiful, beautiful. Donna?
Our strategic plan is built around ends of the college, or policy governance college, and one of those is student success. We're in the process of creating a new strategic plan, and we might only have one end called student success. That's the way it's looking right now.
No, sorry.
No, I was going to say one more thing. In addition to a college strategic plan, we've also pushed it down to department level planning and individual performance evaluation. So everybody's individual performance evaluation can be aligned all the way up to the strategic plan, which is around student success.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Let's get to our last 2 questions, and we'll just kind of do burning moments here, things that are really standing out. On the back, looking at question number 3, how have you used ATD data analysis work to enhance accreditation at your institution? We've addressed a lot of that already, but if there's anyone who's got something dynamic that stood out from your conversations, anyone want to share how you've used data in a way that hasn't already been discussed and described? Anyone? All right, let's jump to number 4 then. How could you, this is a good question to think about, incorporate non-classroom based changes like policy, committee leadership, broad engagement into your accreditation work? So if you've got something to share with that, jump up for us.
Our table talked about using the ATD policy matrix.
You know what? How many of you are familiar with that, the ATD policy matrix? If you're not, you should be. Explain what it is. You know what? Kind of explain what it is, because I heard you talking about it. Stand up.
Well, I think, and I'm looking at our coach back there who brought it to our attention. We're a fairly new ATD college, joined in 2012. And when we started this focus on student success, I don't know if he shared it with us or we found it on the website or whatever, but it's the ATD policy analysis matrix. And it takes you as an institution through all of the areas of your institution that contribute to student success. Attendance policies, your grading policy, your registration policy, your admissions policy. And that we spent a year, like registration, every part of the institution that focuses on student success. And we spent a year going through that policy matrix. We had to find evidence of the policy in the institution. We had to find evidence that the policy was being followed. And then we had to make recommendations as to whether that policy needed to be revised, changed, or out the window.
Can I interrupt you for 2 seconds? What does that sound like you're doing when you do all of that work? Accreditation. Accreditation. That's exactly right. A self-study for accreditation. You're finding the policy, finding where you're using the policy, and showing that. Well, when you do all of that, you're checking off a lot of these compliance issues at the same time.
And we're Northwest, and so this summer we're going to be writing our Year 5 report, and that ATD policy analysis is our Year 5 report.
Beautiful, 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 beautiful. All right, one more.
We took, very similar, we took all the policies that we had and we put them in, we use SharePoint on our campus. We put them all in SharePoint for people to review, and we now have a policy manual. And we took some of the, we wrote our developmental studies policy, we rewrote it, as well as took away some other policies such as outrageous number of holds on students' records that were barriers to them being able to register for classes. So all of that came under the umbrella of ATD. We probably would not have looked at it or had the impetus to look for it if it wasn't for our participation.
Very good. Thank you very much. All right, folks. Well done. Thank you. Good work for late afternoon when your brains have already reached overload. Any questions for our panel or anything else that we can address for you today before we give you some fond farewells? All right.
So, do you have questions for the panelists from Carolina, Commissioner Sachs? I know it's getting late. We did get extra handouts over here for the ones that we ran out of because there were little people in thought. And I also put some brochures out there for the Institute on Best Practices and Institutional Effectiveness for next summer, if anybody wants to pick those up. So, thank you guys for coming, and I hope you learned something, and thanks to the panelists for your work. Good combination. Good. That was Sarah at Achieving the Dream kind of pulled the two of us in, and we said which ones we thought they should invite, you know. So anyway, okay, great. If you have any questions, we'll be here for a few minutes. Otherwise, thanks for coming.